and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, after years of uncertainty since the Brexit referendum in 2016, a deal on the future relations between the EU and the UK has finally been sealed. Kevin Hanrahan, Head of Rural Economy and Development Programme in Teagasc, outlines what this deal actually means for the Irish beef sector.
Well, Catherine, I think what the deal means for the Irish beef sector, farmers, processors and people working in those two parts of the industry is really what was avoided as opposed to what was gotten. I mean, and that's just the nature of Brexit in a nutshell. We're not going to gain anything from it. Not sure anyone is really. We're going to be losing things, and it was about minimising the loss. And I think what the trade deal means is that from the 1st of January, there weren't tariffs on exports of Irish beef to the UK market or on exports of British beef to the Irish market. But what it does mean is that there are going to be changes that meat processors, both in Ireland and in the UK and in the European Union, will have to do in terms of customs and veterinary certificates and export declarations that they will have to fill out as they ship beef and beef products to one another's markets. Now, as of January 1, the European Union, and we're part of the European Union, had done the work and had the facilities ready and the processes ready, and were from day one insisting on all the customs processes and export health certificates to be sort of going with the product, and the UK realised that they weren't ready, despite the fact that they're the root of all this process. So the full phasing in of UK customs checks hasn't really happened yet, and that'll happen as we move towards July. So I wouldn't expect there to be a dramatic impact on the farm gate prices of cattle that farmers get as a result of this agreement, this trade and cooperation agreement, as it's called, the TCA. But what it means, it's about the world you're comparing with. As compared to a world where we didn't get an agreement, we were forecasting that prices would drop dramatically, and I don't think that will happen, because we have actually at the 11th hour, at the 1 minute to midnight, we actually got the agreement, this trade and cooperation agreement.
With over 50% of the Irish beef going to the British market, and as you mentioned, the tariffs and quotas gone, and they were a huge threat, what challenges will there be ahead, or what issues might arise?
The key issues that's concerning people at the moment in industry, I think, and in Kildare Street in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, is how will the UK, Great Britain, implement sort of regulations on imports of beef, and particularly processed beef products. So will the UK basically replicate completely the sort of rules and regs that we apply to third country imports of processed beef products? And that gets to really important trade flows at the moment in terms of minced beef and minced beef products that go from Ireland to Great Britain. And to what extent will the UK adopt European Union type approach that insists that those products have to be frozen if they're not sort of muscle, basically? And that will be an issue, obviously, because there's quite an important trade relationship there in terms of supplying the food service industry, the quick service, the McDonald's and Burger Kings of this world in the UK with Irish beef, quality Irish beef, that could be disrupted. And we don't yet know fully, I think, quite what the UK will do, what Great Britain will insist on. So we'll have to wait and see. So there's those kind of uncertainties that are there. Almost certainly we're facing a new cliff edge, slightly smaller than the one was faced on January 1, as we approach that middle of the year when the UK has said it will be ready to impose all of its customs checks on the Ireland to Great Britain trade flows, which are The European Union is already doing all of its work in Calais and on the coast of the continent. And we are, as a member of the European Union, doing it in Rosslare and in Dublin Port. It's what will happen when the UK gets its act together and actually starts to do the equivalent in Pembroke and in Holyhead and in Calais and the kind of the channel ports for trade that's going from the European Union into the UK. At the moment, the sort of feared for chaos at the ports hasn't materialized because we're early in the year, because a lot of loads just aren't leaving the factories because they know they haven't got the documentation figured out yet. And that's the documentation required for entry into the EU market. Now, if the UK do implement all their customs checks that they said they're going to do by the middle of the year, there will be additional documentation equivalent documentation to get into the UK. And to what extent that will all go seamlessly, I suspect it won't. So there are challenges ahead in terms of making sure that starts to run. We all know that the UK is a very, very important market for Irish beef, 50% thereabouts, and I think that will over time reduce, but the scale of that market, both for Ireland and in a European context, it's just not something that can be replaced overnight. And I think the job for the meat processing industry, with support from Board Bia and from government and from organisations like Teagasc, will basically to grow alternative markets within the European Union and outside the EU, other than the UK, that we can profitably, both at the farm level and at the meat processing level, ship beef to. And that's the hard slog that has already started and will have to continue.
And what changes do you think there will be on trade in relation to north and south of the border here in Ireland?
I don't see enormous changes on the north-south one, unless so the exports of beef products into the UK. I mean, the UK, we have agreed into GB, we've agreed a no tariff agreement with the UK. So there's not going to be tariffs on exports of beef from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So there's not going to be a new magic incentive to ship animals north to Northern Ireland to get processed and then to be sort of slipping in under the door in some sense to avoid tariffs on entry into the UK, because there aren't any tariffs. That's the upside of the agreement. So I don't expect there to be any kind of sort of politically created sort of incentives to change how we've on the island of Ireland managed the flow of animals. I suspect the UK probably will still have a preference for British beef, which will unfortunately, from the perspective of Irish farmers, north and south, probably be reflected in a continuing kind of a gap between the prices that British beef gets on the British market and that Irish beef might get when it gets into that market.
And you've touched on the beef products and minced beef. Likely impact for live exports?
Well, our live export markets are dominated by the continent, though there are live export flows to the UK, so there to Great Britain. So there will be extra checks on those live animal flows that will come with costs. And I would expect there probably will be reduced live exports from Ireland to Great Britain as compared to the past. The live exports to the continent, the industry is telling us that the shipping industry is telling us that that they have the capacity to continue to do that. I guess it's going to be competing on the sort of the routes to the continent with a greater amount of traffic for more common and garden trade, and there possibly will be some impacts in terms of how the ports function, how Rosslare functions in terms of being able to get an increased volumes of boats in, loaded and out that might affect the live trade. But I think most of the live trade doesn't go through the UK, goes direct to the continent, and I think that will continue. but the extra traffic in those ports may have knock-on impacts. But I don't expect that it'll be an enormous shock.
Kevin, farmers are proud of the high standards of production here in Ireland, but over long-term implications for the beef exports to the UK market, could it become flooded with cheap imports?
Yeah, well, the whole point about Brexit from the perspective of the Brexiteers was that they were free to do, they had regained their sovereignty, and they were free of the shackles, as they saw it, of being members of the European Union. And one of the things that they've been very explicit about wanting to do is to have the freedom to strike trade deals. And all the trade deals they've been striking to date have just been ones that attempt to replace the trade deals that they have as members of the European Union. So, but they have ambition to do trade deals with the big agricultural exporters, particularly those that they see as in their version of the world being in the Anglosphere. So that's Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand. Now, the European Union has a trade deal with Canada that the UK will be seeking to replicate. And the UK will be seeking to do trade deals with New Zealand and Australia. The European Union at the moment is negotiating trade deals with those two countries. And no doubt that the UK probably would like to be doing trade deals with the United States. The European Union tried to, but doesn't have a trade deal with the US. So what those countries will be looking for in terms of their bilateral trade negotiations with the UK when they decide to do it, almost certainly they'll be looking for access for their agricultural and food exports. Now, the UK then will, that will be one of the cards they have to offer when they're looking for what they want, their offensive interests in those kind of negotiations. So almost certainly in the medium to longer term, the UK will seek to agree bilateral trade deals that will grant extra market access to beef products that don't have the market access that we had historically and that we have under the terms of this trade and cooperation agreement between the European Union and the UK. And that will mean that Irish beef exporters will find themselves in the future competing more with products from places like Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia, perhaps down the road, the supplies from Mercosur countries as well. And that, compared to the world where that wasn't happening, that will be to the disadvantage of Irish beef exporters and ultimately to the disadvantage of Irish beef farmers. And the UK will do this because they see some gain for their other industries or for their beef consumers, and they no longer really are a part of the European family in terms of caring about what that means for Irish farmers.
Kevin, there's no denying of the fact that the beef sector has suffered huge losses due to market volatility, but is there a price rise on the horizon now as a result of the deal?
Well, I think the looking through this year, I think that it's the COVID side of things will be the general economic recovery in the Eurozone and in the UK will be the critical thing for the Irish beef industry, together with the supply of beef coming off of Europe's farms and Britain's farms. I don't forecast. We're going to be revising our forecast to release in December to take account of the agreement that was reached just before Christmas. But I don't see any dramatic drop, anything on the short-term horizon that suggests that there's going to be a dramatic drop in beef prices. I think the extra trade costs because of the customs checks and the veterinary and certification that has to happen or will happen, particularly in the second half of this year as the UK implements its own customs processes, will probably have a negative impact on the prices for cattle in Ireland. But I don't see that being a very dramatic change. So I would be looking to relative stability as compared to the year we have had, which was actually, if we took out the chaos in the first lockdown period when prices did collapse and there was compensation payments on foot of those, the price year for cattle was actually was not that bad as compared to 2019, for example. So That doesn't mean it was brilliant in terms of what it meant for farm incomes, unfortunately. And what my forecast for the coming year would be at this point, and we have to think through all the issues in the next few weeks before we publish our revised outlook, is that beef prices will be relatively stable as compared to 2020 prices as we move through 2021, with the cloud on the horizon of what the introduction of the full panoply of customs checks by the UK will be on that Ireland to Great Britain trade, which will happen in the second half of the year from July forward. At least that's what the British are telling us at the moment. I would not be surprised if that gets pushed out in due course as they fail on an ongoing basis to get their stuff together. So.
And with current COVID restrictions, what implications would that have for the beef sector at the moment or for the first half of 2021?
I think that it's a negative in terms of what that means for regular food service demand for beef. Your everything from your sit down, have a meal with your significant other type of restaurants to your burger grabbed as you go home from work. But that's been off. I would expect that the retail channel, at least through 2020, really did do an awful lot of work in terms of compensating for the loss of the food service demand, and I expect that would be replicated. And hopefully, as we move into Q2 this year, through the spring and into the early summer, the process of actually vaccinating people in Ireland, but more importantly from the perspective of Irish beef farmers in Britain and in the continent, European Union member states, will mean that life will slowly but surely go back to normal, and that will be good from the perspective of demand for beef and for farm incomes and for farm prices.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Definitely still some uncertainty there until the second half of 2021.
Yeah, unfortunately so, yeah.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Kevin for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.